Hello, folks, and welcome to today's expert webinar presented by AccountantsWorld. We'll be getting started in about 3 minutes here with Jina Etienne, Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Grant Thornton. So we're just about 3 minutes away from starting. Just a reminder, if you haven't downloaded Jina's presentation yet, you can go under the Handouts tab and you'll see two PDFs in there. One is her slides for today, and the other one is a list of articles as well that she is suggesting. So you can go ahead and download those. The slides is going to be the main thing you'll need to follow along with us today. So once again, we'll be getting started in just about 2 or 3 minutes here, and look forward to talking to you soon. Webinar presented by AccountantsWorld. My name is Div Bensali. I'm a Vice President here at AccountantsWorld. And joining us today is Jina Etienne. She'll be presenting diversity as a differentiator. I want to welcome you to this latest installation of the 2018 Expert Webinar Series. I believe this is our 13th of the year. We've got 3 more to go after this one as well. Incredibly excited to have Jina joining us today, and thank you to all of you for joining us today as well. So before we turn things over to Jina, just a couple of housekeeping items related to GoToWebinar. If you haven't used the tool recently or ever before, if you're looking for the control panel, look for an orange arrow that will expand or hide the panel. If you'd like to see your audio options, click on the audio tab, and then you can select whether you'd like to listen in via phone call or computer audio. If you select phone call, you will be given a dial-in number and access code to be able to dial in and listen along. You can go to the Handouts tab, and in fact, you won't just find one, but you'll find 2 PDFs in there. One has Jina's slides for today, and the other one has a series of articles that she's recommending as well. So you can download both of those. The slides is what we'll be following along with starting in just a couple of minutes here. And finally, if you have any questions for Jina during the presentation, go ahead and write them in at any time. We'll try to take some questions during the poll breaks. We have 3 polls today. So we'll try to take questions during then if they come in, and can also take them at the end of the webinar, time permitting. We do offer 1 CP for today's webinar, and that's based on active participation. Active participation means 3 things. Number 1, you attend the live webinar for no less than 50 minutes. Number 2, you respond to all of the polling questions during the webinar. And then number 3, after the webinar is ended, you'll see a post-webinar survey window pop up. Just go ahead and fill that out. You can fill it out right then on the spot. If you don't see it open up, no worries. We'll email you a link within the next 24 hours as well, and you can fill it out from there. We'll notify you by email probably early next week about your CP credit, and make sure to add webinar@accountantsworld.com to your trusted email list to make sure that you receive any emails from us related to CP or future webinars as well. A brief word about AccountantsWorld. AccountantsWorld has two flagship solutions, one for professional accounting and bookkeeping called Accounting Power, and the other one is Payroll Relief, which is our award-winning payroll processing solution designed exclusively for accountants. And there are three things that really set Payroll Relief apart. Number one is an unprecedented level of automation. Payroll Relief is designed to perform all payroll processing and compliance tasks automatically, on time, and with 100% guaranteed accuracy on computations. In addition to that automation, Payroll Relief also delivers a couple of other unique benefits compared to other payroll processing solutions. One is a streamlined workflow. Basically, Payroll Relief is organized to follow the natural sequence of payroll processing, so it's very intuitive and easy to learn and use. And number two, customization. You can customize your payroll service to best meet the needs of each of your clients, no matter how simple or sophisticated their needs are. Over 70% of Payroll Relief customers have cut their processing time by 25% or more, and we've been awarded 5 stars by CPA Practice Advisor 5 years running. We're the only payroll processing solution that's achieved that. If you'd like to learn more about Payroll Relief and how you can make payroll processing more efficient and profitable, very simple way to do this. On the post-webinar survey, we have a question asking you if you'd like to get registered for our free payroll webinar. Just select a date and you'll automatically be registered and you'll receive a reminder email from GoToWebinar. And now, before I turn it over to Jina Etienne, a quick word about her. She's the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Grant Thornton LLP. There, she's responsible for developing and implementing the firm-wide diversity and inclusion strategy. And I want to congratulate her on just recently being named a member of 2018 Accounting Today's Top 100 Most Influential list. So at this time, I'd like to turn the floor over to Jina Etienne.
Thank you, and thank you for that. I am trying to get my screen to show, and so let me know if you can see it.
Yep, I see it.
Yay, and you see the right things.
I think so.
Even better. So thank you, and by the way, can I just say, shout out, I was in practice for 17 years as a sole practitioner, and I was a Payroll Relief and AccountantsWorld customer. Woo, woo. So I love that program. And I think it's a great product, so just thought I'd share. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. Today I want to talk about, the title says, diversity is a differentiator. But what does that mean? Skipping by my bio slide. Really what I want to do is walk through 4 areas. First, I'm going to start off looking at some demographic shifts, because I think it's interesting to look at the predictions for the population changes as it compares to where we are today. That'll be really relevant when we start talking about how do you make a difference, or how does diversity make a difference for small firms. Speaking of small firms then, and that's really what I'm focusing on here, is what is the economic forecast for small business in the United States? And I think this is particularly relevant when we start talking about the link between diversity and innovation. Now, I use diversity innovation connection here, but I really want to be clear that when I think about innovation, what I'm framing it as how to keep top of mind, how to continually think about your operations, your products and services, your business methodology, so that it doesn't just become, well, that's how we've always done it, but really staying current. It's not what I mean. I don't want it to be something that's trendy, but I do believe that particularly for small firms, diversity is something firms can tap into. And when they want to think about how creatively they deliver those services or engage with their people or connect with their clients and communities. And then lastly, where I want to end up is to quantify this. What does this mean from a business perspective? In my role, everybody says they're passionate about D&I when I meet them. And while I love that people are passionate about it, I would like to be more about our business. In other words, and I'll say it in a kind of weird way, if nobody cared about D&I whatsoever, from a passion perspective, we would still be paying attention to it because there's a business imperative. So that's what I mean by quantifying diversity. And finally, Q&A. And really, Div, I'm happy to take questions as we go along. It just depends on, if you see a question that's relevant, stop me, let's tackle it. Otherwise, we can hold them to the end as well. Sound good? And with that, I do want to ask if we can start our first poll, because I'm curious who's present by firm size.
Sounds great. So I've gone ahead and launched the first poll question. So folks, you should be seeing that first poll in front of you. Simple question: how big is your firm? Sole practitioner, small to mid-sized firm, large firm, big four, or not a CPA firm? So please go ahead and submit your answer. Make sure to click the submit button so that your vote is counted.
This is great because I'm seeing them coming in the background, and this is great because the target for the subject for me is really where I used to live. I started at Touche back in the day. I'm dating myself now. I'm back when there was a Big 8. But I had my own firm for 17 years, and at my largest, I had 5 employees. So I really was a sole practitioner in the sense that there was one owner, one CPA in the firm. And I still believe diversity is relevant for the smallest of firms. Unfortunately, you don't see the conversation nationally around diversity below the bigger firms.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how long you keep these open, and
I'm going to take, let's take about 5 to 10 more seconds for any stragglers to go ahead and get your vote in. A reminder, this is required. Voting in this is required in order to earn CP credit today. So let's take just another couple seconds here. Going once, going twice. Okay, so we see 45% came in as sole practitioners, 25% as small to mid-sized firms.
So what's interesting is that is probably the easiest CPE question anybody's ever going to get. Is that right? For purposes of maintaining our licenses?
Yes, I would imagine so, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Well, this is great. So let's move on then. I now know who's here, and it validates that I'm talking to small firms and sole practitioners. So I want to start with demographics. And the reason I want to look at demographics is, what does it look like in the United States today? These are just everybody that lives here. And so we're currently roughly rounding 61% white, 16% Hispanic, 13% Black, 5.86% Asian. And yes, I'm going to use those terms rather than African American or Pan Asian. Forgive me, they're just shorter terms. I personally am half Filipino and half Black, and so I've never gone by the term African American. I've always gone by the term Black, and I think it's something that's really relevant to our individual identities. So I mean no offense. I just wanted to be clear on language. Also looking at the population, we're roughly 50-50 male and female, which is really interesting when you start thinking about demographics gender-wise of our leadership, not only across the profession, but across business in general. So I want you to keep this in mind as we look forward at what this is going to mean in just a few years. Now it's 2018. This is an article, and it's in the list of articles that I've provided. I would encourage you to read it. It's fascinating to look at how minorities are going to be influencing business decisions, business operation models, the nature of the services we offer as accountants and as CPAs, particularly in public accounting, going forward. So the projections are that by 2045, the US will become minority white. And so if you look at that, it really suggests, well, actually, I'm thinking out loud here that it's not in and of itself meaningful until you start looking at it more specifically. So for example, the growth rate within the minority populations, the multiracial group, which is the one I fall into, is projected to grow 176% over the next 20, 30, 40 years. The growth rate is largest among Asians, projected at 93% versus Hispanics at 86%, Black at 34%. Also, what's interesting, and it's particularly relevant given a lot of what's happening in our politics today, immigration is a significant factor in these growth rates for both the Asian and the Hispanic populations, not so much in the Black or the multiracial populations. This is complicated by a change in birth rates. So if you look at so this is a continuation, by the way, of that quote from the previous slide. If you look at the population, we were at 61% white. Today, we're predicted to be 49% or 50%. I'm rounding down now to 49%, which is where we get to the minority. So we don't want to overstate minority, because by minority white, it means we're less than statistically 50%. So this is going to be interesting, and it's because of what that then means for where do we recruit, how do we recruit, how do we work in terms of styles. I don't have a slide up here, but in hindsight, I thought I should have had one that talks about workforce age brackets, because millennials are currently 35% of the workforce. And what's interesting is that if you start looking at the tipping point for when the population becomes minority white, it varies by age. So rather than being 2045 for the entire United States, the majority, the date when those below the ages of 39 will become minority white in the United States is only 2033 versus 2020, which is 2 years from now. 2 years from now, when those 18 and under will be minority white as a population in the United States. So I put these side by side so we can take a look at them and compare what the differences are. And it's interesting because the biggest area of growth is really in the Hispanic community. And there's a lot more to think about there, particularly if your firm targets Hispanic businesses, works in a Hispanic area in terms of community, or your staff is made up largely of those who are Hispanic. And even if you're not of Hispanic origin, do you have Spanish as a second language in your communities and in your firms? And these are some things to be thinking about just in terms of operations. So what's going on behind the shift? And this is a little more from that same article. There are changes that are immigration and birth rates. The birth rates are higher birth rates for minorities than in the white population. And it's also because of the projected decline due to deaths in the current white majority population, which is also the oldest part of our population. So lots of numbers here. I didn't mean to spend too much time on numbers, but I think it's interesting because if we look at the demographics of firms, in the back of my mind, I'm already looking at that 78%. This is from the trends report that the AICPA puts out every 2 years. So this is the one from last summer. 78% all staff, all firms, public accounting, white. Compare that to 61% in the United States population. Now for the remainder of this dialogue, I'm going to focus on white versus black as percentages simply because I know those numbers more by heart. And it was easier to just sort of follow one group. So the black population in the United States is 13%, but we're a population of 3% when we come to staff. But if we filter the staff in CPA firms down to just the CPAs, so essentially we're taking out the admin staff, operations staff, possibly some advisory staff, depending on the firm structure. Hopefully my audio keeps coming through. My phone just did something weird. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you came back.
Okay, good. So we dropped to 1% of the population as Black or African American, and we jumped to 88% white. When we start filtering more and just look at the partner level across public accounting, partners today are 95% white. Compare that to 0.3% Black, 2% Hispanic, 2% Asian. And I think this is important because it's going to, Dave, if I cut out, do me a favor and just pop in and let me know, because I'm hearing strange things on my end and I just want to make sure it's not me. But I'll keep talking throughout. So I want to do these same statistics, and I'm going to just reveal them all here. When we look at it from a gender perspective, we know the United States population is pretty much 50-50, and we're getting really close there from a staffing perspective in terms of 50-50. CPAs, we have more men than women, but then we get to partners, and we have they're 77% male and 23% female. So if I summarize that then, partners in CPA firms are still today 95% white and 77% male. I think this is something that we need to pay close attention to because the partners determine how we go out to market, how we show up at networking events, how we manage our meetings, the way we talk to our clients. Even simple things like mannerisms and dress code, those things become increasingly relevant when you think about the population of the majority of the workforce, which is currently millennial, 35% of the workforce, and Gen X, that's me, 33% of the workforce. Together, we make up 68% of the workforce. And it's important for those styles and mannerisms to be factored in. So before I move beyond this, I want to think about the audience we have today. So Dave, if we can ask the next poll question.
Sure. So the second poll question should be up at this point in front of the attendees. The question is, how diverse is your firm or organization compared to that of your largest client? You see the four options there. Please go ahead and select one of those options and make sure to click the submit button.
So I was really curious about this because in my firm, I had one woman who worked for me, white, a gentleman who worked for me, Hispanic, another woman who worked for me, African American, Black, and then my mother was my office manager, Asian. And then I shared space with another CPA who was white. She was also lesbian. So I think we were about as diverse as you could get. We had a mix of everything, genders, races, ages. But when I think about my client base, and I'm based in the Washington metropolitan area, my client base was majority white, which I think is fascinating. And I'm curious what this means for our group. So I would have answered that I was more diverse, but it looks like our participants are answering a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm.
How long do we keep this open, or is it okay to close it?
We're going to give about 5 to 10 more seconds here. So folks, if you haven't answered yet, please go ahead and do so.
I'm noticing that there's actually a percentage bigger than I expected that said they were not sure. So if these are our final results, I see that we're 11% not sure, 19% say they're more diverse, 27% say they're less diverse, and 44% about the same. And it's interesting that those that are not sure, I'd be curious if that's, I wish I could have a follow-up question. And in fact, I would encourage you all, maybe this isn't the way we're supposed to use the question box, but drop into the question area some thinking behind the not sure. Is it because you'd never thought about it before? It's because you don't really know the makeup of your client base? Is it because you never looked for it to assess it? I'd be very curious about the why there. And that's really important as we move on, particularly talking about what this means. I like the fact that almost half say they're about the same or more diverse. So this is great. So let's move to our next section where we talk about small business growth. And there are a couple of things, a couple of quotes that I threw in here. According to the Private Capital Index, Access Index report, 84% of small business owners expect their business to perform better in 2018. Another one here, the number of minority-owned small businesses is growing at a faster rate than general small business growth. So for minority-owned small businesses, the growth rate is about 10 times faster. And in fact, we know, looking back, I was looking back over the last 10 years or so, the growth rate among women-owned businesses has been significant, and now we're starting to see it more among minority-owned businesses. This is important, and this gets to the question earlier about the diversity of that group of business. They are more diverse, generally speaking. So some people might wonder, why are we thinking about diversity if you're a small firm? The small firms are already more diverse. The stats are right here that show that 7 out of 10 small businesses have at least one female employee. A quarter of them have at least one non-white employee. 8% have an employee with a disability, at least one. And that's just among the staff. If you look at it across the leadership and executive levels within small business, And I use executive level loosely because I was the partner / owner, and the next level down was staff and then office admin. So I guess I was executive and management. 35% women, 6% non-white majority. And I think this is very important and relevant because when we think about diversity, part of the reason some of the participants said they're not sure, this is why I'm curious what the responses are, or about the same might be because if you're already diverse and you have a mindset where you don't think about it anymore, it might be something where you just naturally attract other people who have the same mindset as you. So I'm going to keep moving forward because there's a couple things I want to get to, and I just want to make sure I'm paying attention to time. Accounting industry, it's a big industry, right? I just draw out here that stat about 88% white in terms of race from the accounting and auditing perspective. And there are 95,000 businesses that offer accounting services, roughly 42,000 CPA firms. For context, there are only 4 big 4, just as a reminder. A lot of people think about the accounting industry as the big 4, and in AICPA terms, they have something called the major firms group, which are the next 100 largest firms. They have another group of firms that they call the G400, I believe is the term. And so between the G400, major firms group, and the big 4, those are the 500 largest CPA firms out of that bucket of roughly 42,000 CPA firms. What I think is interesting is that most of the rest of the firms in that 42,000 bucket fall into the group of people attending the webcast today. 70% are sole practitioners, 27% are small firms, meaning they have 5 CPAs or less. So that's the majority of the 42,000 CPA firms that support this industry are small firms, and that's really important. What's more important is that the projected growth rate going forward for accountants and auditors is 10%. It's above average for all other occupations. That's a statistic that I believe I pulled that statistic out in June. And so this is important to think about because as businesses change, and we know that startups are going to continue to pop up all over the country, as we start to see shifts in industry and focus, and we start to see new management and leadership take over across all levels of businesses and all sizes of businesses, where businesses are run by Gen Xers who top out today. If you're a Gen Xer, you are between the age of 38 and 54. If you're a millennial, you're between the ages of 22 and 37, roughly. I think 37 should get some people to go, wow, I didn't realize they were so quote unquote old. But you may be looking to serve clients who are owned or led or managed by somebody who's a millennial. This is important to think about when we talk about what that means from a diversity perspective. So when we talk about diversity, it actually means 2 different things to different groups. If you're a baby boomer or a Gen Xer, generally speaking, we look at diversity along the lines of, say, equal affirmative action or equal opportunity. It's about fairness. It's about protection. And we look at it along those traditional classes: race, gender, religion, ethnicity, sexual orientation. But if you're a millennial, and this is important, they don't see diversity as a question of fairness and protection. They see diversity more as being included for and accepted for who they are. It's about inclusion. It's about identity. It's style. It's experience. It's religion. It's perspective. I say this because if you are in a small firm, and your small firm is one that might be less diverse, that's almost a third of our participants today. Let's assume, for argument's sake, that by less diverse, that small firm is either all or mostly Asian, all or mostly Hispanic, all or mostly white or black. The group that's all or mostly anything might perceive themselves to be less diverse if they're a boomer or a Gen Xer. If, however, there are a lot more millennials in that group, or it's a firm owned and run by millennials, they might see themselves as very diverse because they're not focused on ethnicity that they have in common, but some of them are introverts and some of them are extroverts. Some of them like to sleep late, some of them are early risers. They have different religions. And I think this is a really important thing to focus on from a diversity perspective, because a lot of people don't think about diversity beyond, say, race and gender, partly because of the language. So actually, I did want to find out what the makeup is of this group now that I've put that out there. So the last polling question, if we can open that up, is really about not necessarily you attending, but for those of you that are attending, I want to think about the people who are the partners or the leaders in your particular firm, what generation they're from. So already the responses are coming in, and so far, mostly baby boomers and Gen X. A couple people aren't sure. In case this helps, I wrote these down somewhere. Gen X is between the, like I said, the age 38 and 54. If you're 55 and above, you're a baby boomer. If you're 37 and below, you're a millennial, if that helps. I don't know. Well, we have a couple of people are less not sure. So I'll repeat that. 37 and below, millennial. 55 and above, boomer. Anything in between, Gen X. And that's just for purposes of this presentation.
Sounds good. And we'll just take about 10 more seconds here for people to get their vote in if they haven't already done so. All right, going once, going twice. And here we go. So 57% baby boomers, Jina.
57% boomers, 37% Gen X. We actually have a few millennials and still a few who aren't sure. Thank you guys for participating and sharing that with me. And I think it's important to think about diversity then, because the Gen Xers that are on this presentation, if you're like me, in some ways you think very much like a baby boomer. In other ways, you might think more like a millennial, and we tend to sort of straddle both of those groups. But diversity is really important, particularly when it comes to innovation. If we go back to my definition of innovation from the beginning, and this is really thinking about fresh, new ways to approach operations, delivery of products and services, and business methodologies and things like that. How do you keep those types of changes happening? So I'll give you an example. When I was in practice, I started, well, we had computers then. I was about to say something sarcastic, but I won't. We had just started using computers day to day in practice, and we had just started, I was a tax practitioner, and we had just even gotten to the software where you could prepare the returns on your computer and print it out right there on your local computer. I sound really old now. By the time I sold my practice in 2011, my practice was completely in the cloud. I was using payroll relief, so I was actually providing payroll services as an independent third-party provider directly to my clients. I even had some clients running the payroll themselves using payroll relief. Where in the background I did the supporting and the filing and things like that. I had a file cabinet where all my clients uploaded all of their documents. I used digital tax organizers. I didn't mail out any paper. I was a completely paperless office. And my workforce had an unlimited leave policy. And by that I meant everybody had assigned roles. The expectation was they got their jobs done. If they could get their jobs done in 20 hours a week, I kind of would look at them with a little, mischievous look and say, if you can get your work done in 20 hours, go for it. Because I knew that they couldn't. But what I was really trying to incentivize them to do was optimize how you worked. I didn't care how you got the work done, so long as you got the work done. And we were only starting to see social media and engagement start to drive the way we communicated with clients. I'm actually grateful that I'm not in practice today, given some of the stress of social media in terms of communicating with clients through things like Facebook and LinkedIn, your own internal systems, let alone texting and all these other platforms that are out there. And I think that from an innovation perspective, this is where firms can particularly leverage their diversity, because it is the different types of work styles, the way of thinking and approaching things that is really, really useful. What's interesting about innovation is that if everybody in a firm thinks the same way, works the same way, maybe went to the same school or goes to the same church, what you'll find is that there's less likelihood to be dynamic and responsive in how the firm might change or upgrade or innovate its operations or its communications over time. And so it's really important to think about diversity when you're thinking about how to keep your firm productive and growing and profitable. This is a particularly good article that I would encourage everyone to read. What does diversity mean in a very small company? I would define mine as a very small company. And I love the fact that they walk through some examples of what to think beyond with respect to diversity. This is where the differentiator comes into play, if you ask me. So the title of this presentation is Diversity as a Differentiator. And I've spent a lot of time so far talking about about demographics and what the diversity means and how small business is predicted to grow. This is where the rubber hits the road. You have a small firm. Let's pretend in my mind, the small firm, we know that the attendees here are largely sole practitioners, which means it might just be you. It might be you with a couple of staff. But if you look at your group and think about how diverse your group is, I want you to think beyond race. So as this article suggests, looking across your firm, is it all the same gender, or do you have both men and women in your firm? If you have both men and women in your firm, do they do the same types of work? Do they have the same types of opportunities for growth in the firm? Even if you have a firm of all women, does everybody go to the same church? Does anybody have military experience in the past? Has anybody ever worked for a startup? There's different past work experiences that you could have. I would argue that if I were to walk into a room today and the room was 100 men, all white, we might still very much have a diversity problem in the room. I use the word problem because the room visually looks like there is no diversity. We all historically talk about diversity solely from the perspective of gender and race. So there might then be those who think this room isn't very diverse at all, and then never give it another thought. But I would suggest that when you start thinking about things like past work experience, military experience, sexual identity, religious backgrounds, where you grew up, those who were in the military, were you in the United States, or did you serve, or did your parents serve around the country? Anybody ever work in a nonprofit? There's a lot of things to think about when it comes to diversity beyond the status quo. The other thing is thinking beyond employees. Do you have independent contractors that you use? Do you have interns? I know I had a rotation for the last 2 years. I would have a steady rotation of high school interns that would come into my firm and do some work. Do you have, if you are the firm owner, have you thought about, or do you already have in place an advisory board that you use just to give you counsel? You know, it's hard to be the sole executive person in an organization. Oftentimes your employees don't want to give you certain types of feedback. So forming an advisory board is a really great way of getting executive level feedback. So if you look at your advisory board, are they diverse? Do you have a coach, or is there an executive? Do you have a mentor? And do they look different from you? Do they think different from you? Do they have different backgrounds and experiences? Really what I'm trying to get you to think about, and what this article does a great job of, is suggesting that we really need to think differently about how we look at the people that we engage with for input, insights, ideas, ideation, and look just beyond the quote unquote W-2 employee. And then the last one is activities, think activities. And I love that, because when you think about activities, what they suggest is don't just go to like happy hour networking or to the local chamber of commerce events with your team. And I thought this was, I will say, I admitted admittedly sort of laughed out loud when I read it in the article, but it said, take your team to a dance recital. Now, perhaps that might not be the right one for you, but maybe it also said skeet shooting. And I was really into trap shooting. And we have a beautiful, there's PG Trap and Skeet. It's a beautiful Olympic quality facility here where I live, only about 10 miles from my house. I would absolutely, where I'm still in practice today, having read that article, do that. So that's just something to think about. And it's really important because it's a different way of looking at diversity. It's really about getting everybody together. And I love this quote. It's getting everybody together, but still allowing everybody to think, show up, and be their different and unique selves. So I really love that, and looking at it beyond race, beyond gender. So before I go into questions, what I want to talk about a little bit is about the quantification part, because I think this is where we should really be thinking about it. How do we then, if we tap into and think beyond employees and think beyond race and start engaging with our teams beyond just the employees in different and unique ways, how can that help us drive business? And so there are a couple of articles. This McKinsey study, I actually gave you two different links in here, one to the full white paper and one to the article specifically that I pulled a quote from, but there's a lot more there that you can find, and I would encourage you to look for it. More and more research today, not just this study, shows that organizations that have more racial diversity and more ethnic diversity just perform better, bottom line. We're still waiting for more validated research that start to show correlation. Right now, all we have is, the link between correlation and causation. All we have right now is correlation, and that's important to differentiate. But we do know, so this article from Small Business Trends, there's a white paper, by the way, in this article that I would encourage you to look at, but it also references the McKinsey work, that there's a measurable difference that they were able to identify when it came to organizations that were more diverse. The last article that I think is really important was one that was written by Carrie Goman. She's blogs and writes for Forbes. She's the president of Xero. If anyone uses the software, I love it. So I think that the really important point that she brings up in this article underscore why diversity makes a big difference. Minority-owned business, go back to the statistic, minority-owned business is growing at a faster rate than any other small business in the United States. However, we also know that minority-owned businesses have the least likelihood of hiring an accountant or a CPA firm. I say that because for all of you sole practitioners listening today, I would encourage you to think about how to show up by leveraging the diversity in your firm, whether it's race, whether it's gender, religion, ethnicity, hobbies, whatever it is. How can you leverage that to connect differently with your community so that you can better connect with the small businesses, which might also be great references and connections to the next level business up, so that you can grow your client base and support those small businesses and those entrepreneurs in your community. If the entrepreneurs see themselves represented in you, they are more likely, in theory, to hire you, and they will then more likely, statistically we know, succeed. And so I think that's really important, and that I will tell you that when I was in practice, I spent the first 5 years of my practice trying to look like every other CPA firm. And by that, I would mean the personality of the CPA, the gender of the CPA. I tried to hide as much as I could the fact that I was female and Black and a bit quirky, because I thought it took away from my business. What I came to learn is that my clients loved me for who I was and how I showed up. And I came to believe, well, I read a book called The E Myth. E stands for entrepreneur. It's by Michael Gerber. Highly recommend it. And because of reading that book, what I came to realize is that accounting tax person. CPA is what I am. It's what it's what I do, but it's not who I am. And I was able to, it freed me up to live my authentic self, be my quirky self, and separate the fact that I'm not like every other accountant, not personality-wise, and certainly not racially, certainly not gender, like the majority. And that's what made me different. And so I would encourage everyone to try to find those opportunities to do the same and to look beyond just the W-2 employees that are there, but look at your clients. They are a reflection back to you, especially for those of you who said that they were less diverse or even more diverse. How are those opportunities for you to connect with your clients and possibly build business and so on? I just think it's something that we don't think about too often. The personality of the profession, I would love to see us become known as crazy, different, quirky, interesting, and really, really, really smart. Well, the really smart part we already know about. What I'm hoping to see is all the other aspects of our collective personalities start to shine through. And so what I'll do is I'm going to stop there to make sure that we have some time for questions, because I haven't been looking at the question queue, Div.
Yep. So one question that came in from Armando was, do you have any marketing ideas mentioning my solo firm's attention to diversity? And I guess that brings up a question of is a attention to diversity something that should be marketed? And then if so, what's the best way to do that?
So that's interesting. I think it's a catch-22. Diversity and inclusion as a phrase, or D&I, has become something that so many people have started to talk about and use that it's almost not as impactful anymore. I think I would encourage you to do a couple of things. First, I would go back to your website, look at maybe your brochure or some marketing materials you have, and just to see an exercise that I did, by the way, is I spent one Saturday afternoon doing this. I actually randomly tried to find 5 firms that were competitor firms of mine and put all of our website, I printed this all out and sort of laid it all out side by side, and I looked at how we described ourselves. And I was shocked to find out that we all described ourselves basically the same way. And so I spent the rest of that afternoon trying to find a different way so that when you read through my website and the descriptions of how we work, you really got a sense of who I was rather than got a sense of she's a really good CPA. So that would be one way I would recommend you do it, is just thinking about how to be more authentic in representing your personality, your style, and your team. The other thing would be to specifically state that you are committed to diversity, but I would encourage you to then add a sentence or two about what diversity means to you, because diversity means a lot of things, but depending on the age of the person, as we've seen, if they're a boomer or a Gen X, they might simply think you're referring to groups by race and by gender. But I certainly think there's an opportunity to differentiate yourself, especially if there's a specific thing about you that you'd like to highlight or draw attention to. Does that answer the question, you think?
Yep, that's great. And another question is coming from Paul, which is, can you suggest methods of reaching the core millennial audience with the goal of eventually them taking over the practice?
So that's going to be more interesting. That's about how do you, so there's messaging and branding as an organization to attract clients. In the past, there was a very different approach used to attract employees and team members. Today, what millennials are doing is they're looking at how you talk to your clients and how you talk to your community to see if you are a place where they would want to work. So some of what I said earlier applies in terms of trying to attract millennials to come and work with you and for you. Once you start to have traction there, how to get them to stay long enough to maybe consider buying out the practice will come down to how flexible, I'm going to say, you might be in how you run the practice. There are very different styles. Most of the leadership in the public accounting space today are boomers and Gen X's. And what I've heard from, I'll say, millennial staff on the side is that they just are going to leave and do their own thing rather than stay in some of these bigger firms or even in some of the small firms because the owners are less flexible. or aren't as open to change, or aren't as open to trying new things. So I would suggest if you ask your millennial teams and employees to solve a problem for you, maybe suggest that they can find a new way to either connect or engage with clients, et cetera. The more involved they are in the way the firm runs, the more likely they are to stay. And the more your firm starts to modernize, the more likely they are to stay. And then the more your firm's messaging is around work-life integration, not about boundaries and separation, but to bring your whole self to work, they're more likely to stay.
Great. Yeah, that's I think a really comprehensive answer to that. One other question that's come in from David: do you believe in testing for accounting abilities as a way to avoid bias? I'm a CPA in my late 50s, and my age is a hindrance in getting interviews. I don't get a chance to demonstrate my abilities and would gladly accept proficiency testing to show my value as well as my experience. A resume doesn't always help with older workers.
Say that again, the first part.
Yep. Do you believe in testing for accounting abilities as a way to avoid bias in hiring?
So I love this question. The best way I can answer it is something that I did in my firm. So at first I used to hire people based solely on exactly that, accounting ability. Then I tried to swing another direction, and I based my hiring decisions on personality fit. What I ended up doing the last 4 years, and this was the last 4 years I was in practice, was doing a mix of the two. So I would interview for style and fit to ensure that we would be able to work together. It wasn't so much that I had to like them, it's so much that we had to be able to communicate. Because if in a very small environment, if I have to work super hard to communicate with somebody, it's dreadful for all of us. And then I also did, rather than testing, I put together a dummy tax return, a dummy QuickBooks file, and depending on the role that the person was interviewing for, I would have them do the prep work or the review work just to get a sense for how they worked. And what I interviewed for wasn't technical ability. It was willingness to ask questions and willingness to be unsure. Because there was data that I specifically pulled out of those dummy files. And if the candidate came back to me purporting to have done a good job with very few questions, I was doubtful of that person. But if the best hire I ever made, she actually said, I didn't know A, B, and C. And B in particular was a challenge because in order to know B, I needed to have, know X, Y, and Z. And there's no mention of it. But based on the other information, I concluded it could be this and moved forward based on that. I hired her instantly because what she showed me was common sense, judgment, critical thinking, and a willingness to figure it out as we went along and not this need to show up right. And I think this need to show up right is the biggest danger to all of us, that we don't share our uncertainties is where we end up being dangerous, at least within the environment of being a team and trying to problem solve to find the best solution for our client. So it's a mixed answer, really.
And I think that's just to interject for a second here. I think that's so important to recognize the nuance on that it's not a clear yes or no. You're using the evaluation techniques that you've probably traditionally used, but meshing them with other ones as well.
Right.
Yeah. I think those are all the questions we have right now. If there are any final questions, please go ahead and submit them in. But Jina, thank you so much for your presentation today. I definitely learned from it as well, and I'm sure our attendees did as well. I'm going to take back control here for a minute to just do one closing slide here. So folks, thank you for joining us today. Just as a reminder, our next expert webinar is 2 weeks from today. It's with Kimberly Ellison Taylor. She's the most recent past chairperson of the AICPA, and she'll be talking about limitless possibilities, technology, and tomorrow's firm. That webinar will be starting at 3 p.m. Eastern rather than 2 p.m. Eastern, so make note of that time. If you haven't signed up for that yet, you can go to 2018webinars.com, 2018webinars.com, and sign up for that free CP webinar. If you're not sure if you've signed up or not, go ahead and sign up again. Just takes a minute, and that'll ensure that you get the reminder emails about that. And also, just as a reminder, the faster, easier payroll webinar that we offer, which will show you how payroll relief can help you to create a more efficient, profitable payroll practice. To sign up for that one, we offer that webinar every week, multiple times per week. So when you see the post-webinar survey come up, just go ahead and select what date you would like to attend, what date and time, and we will get you signed up for that automatically. So once again, Jina, thank you so much for joining us today and for your time today.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. And we look forward to seeing all of you attendees at our payroll webinar next week, at one of our payroll webinars next week, and then at Kimberly Ellison Taylor's webinar 2 weeks from now. Thanks again.